do a few minutes, haven't we?
Yeah.
So,
could they stand up?
Can you stand up?
It's probably not working. It's only working for the video.
Oh, I see.
So you have to speak
So
up.
I'm really sorry, right. So our discussion focused around 3 or 4 themes, and this is a table of experts like every other table, so it should be. First of all, we thought the introduction to the name was strong. We thought its focus was more on the socio-cultural context of teachers, and the socio-cultural context of teacher learning. And there was little bits that came out which we thought maybe to be highlighted a bit more. That is, what is teacher learning? We thought it was quite an interesting thing when somebody talked about curriculum teacher learning. We felt a group like this ought to be giving a lot more oomph to considering what that might be. Of course, it's going to be contested territory, but it's surprising how a lot of work has been done on that. And then, of course, if you can do some mapping of what teacher learning, there's the how question, and we felt that there's quite a bit of counterintuitive evidence around that we just need to explore without prejudice about this. For example, there is a consensus generally in teacher education circles that collaborative learning is the best way forward, and the sort of thing that I'm doing now, didactic approaches a little bit less. But of course, we do find there's research evidence that shows that there's many collaborative schemes which are unsuccessful in terms of what they want to do, and we find some examples of some fairly formal workshop situations which are very effective. So that the processes that are associated with that we think are important. So the what and the how, as well as the social cultural context, are important. And then a final point from me is that, of course, the other thing we have to bear in mind is that all the evidence is very, very solid. A very large number of teachers do not like the professional development experience that they get at the moment. So, I mean, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of teachers who have, if universities aren't doing this, people out there doing this professional development work, they're not getting a very good press from teachers. Why?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mark. Judy?
Okay, well, I'm not too sure which of these points were ones which we came up with in the group, which were observations of my own. I just want to make a couple of points, really. One is that I think the Teaching School Alliance model does offer a real opportunity for us to use the national policy to forward what quite clearly some of you want to do anyway. So that's a kind of, it's about the vehicle of using, rather than moaning, which is always tempting, given some of the policies we've got to go to. It's always a good thing to be able to kind of, you know, like good schools always say, well, we use that initiative to do something that we really want to do anyway. So given that research is one of the big 6 requirements for teaching in schools, I think that and I think that in general terms that isn't actually happening at the moment, that there is a very low level of engagement in research, even in terms of using research. We need to focus on what conditions need to be present for that to happen, what kind of infrastructure, what kind of support, all of that. And I know there's some of you, Philippa particularly, lots of people in the room, who've worked on this for years, so it's not a new thing. The question of actually articulating now a bit more what kinds of things might help push that forward. I'm sorry, I'm obsessed with this, and several people have heard me say this many times before, but I think it needs to be in the teaching standards. That doesn't mean that it's teachers' fault when they don't do it, but I think having teaching standards and not mentioning research is absolutely bizarre, given that, you know, we had a teacher training agency whose slogan was evidence. What was
Evidence-informed.
Evidence-informed teaching, promoting evidence-informed teaching, but it wasn't in the teaching standards. So at least that would give us all an expectation without attributing guilt. I think that some of the work Joe Trugento and I were involved in last year with alliances that were using the iris technology, or pupils, in one case, one alliance very successfully using students' feedback in the process of teaching learning, that both of those two offer a lot more practical ways forward in terms of teacher time. So whether it's, you know, observation through video, observation with students, and finally, and this goes back to Bob's point actually about what the research actually says, and interrogating that a bit more. Years and years ago, 1980s research told us that in the coaching relationship, the observer learns more than the observed. We've persistently ignored that in every policy we've had. So I would say that the data we got last year with teaching school alliances showed very clearly. I've got one, probably a stack of 20 or more observation sheets from teachers, evaluation sheets, where they say, I learned a tremendous amount when I watched so-and-so. Not when I was being watched and we had a chat about it, but when I was watching so-and-so. So I think, you know, we need to revisit that.
Thank you very much. Philippa.
Sorry, slight pause while I disentangle my reading glasses from my scarf. We picked up this point about why collaboration matters. We picked up the point about what are some of the learning processes and what is collaboration, what forms does it need to take, why it matters, and that reciprocal vulnerability is one of the things that helps speed up trust building and enable risk taking. And shared responsibility for tasks plays really important in that. We talked quite a lot about conscripts and choice and volunteering, which led us into thinking about the conditions in schools that enable deep professional learning to take place. And began to think about how to develop partnerships between schools and universities where roles are clear and where the school is thinking and taking responsibility holistically for its part of the piece, and the university is doing the same, and they're not leaving a big hole between them, neither are they trying to do each other's job for them, and that there's actually scope for thinking about it a lot more. And in particular, we talked about Vivienne Robinson's findings about the importance of leadership teams modelling professional learning, and now that's got twice the effect of any other correlational evidence, and we thought we could harness that. And we finished really by talking about the importance of theory in professional learning and needing a new language for that, looking at the sometimes unhelpful weight and power of the notion of theory within the academy, but nonetheless, if we thought that if we could have reached in 5 years' time a point where all teachers absolutely felt that, understanding why things work and having a practical theory, we would really have got this professional learning thing motoring. But we think we probably need to deconstruct what theory is and create a language that's a new shared language around professional learning for that.
Thank you. Here.
Okay, I think what we were mainly discussing, and people will help me out, is we were thinking about how can we widen and have a more inclusive debate about the nature of teacher learning, and also the point that Ian made in one of his slides about understanding teacher learning. It's part of thinking about what kind of people we want teachers to be and what kind of role teachers should have in terms of values as well as knowledge and skills and understanding. So thinking about this, widening the debate, we talked a lot about how can we make better connections between what we already know, that we already know quite a lot, but it tends to be quite compartmentalised and in a pocket called school leadership or a pocket called something else. So how do we make connections between what we already know, and how can we have more synthesis and meta-analysis of existing research that can actually draw out some key points about teacher learning. But then we also talked about widening debate in the sense of being heard. And it's often quite difficult to ensure that even when you can integrate and synthesise and build on what we already know, who are we speaking to, and do they want to hear what we've got to say? And so we were thinking about, in terms of how well have teacher educators been able to position themselves in terms of this debate, and how likely are policymakers to listen. And then we started to talk about actually looking at universities, that actually to what extent do we open up the debate more widely within universities about teacher learning and about what education is, so that we can draw upon that. And also about perhaps some people like parents, that how directly do we engage and talk to parents about what kind of teacher you're teaching your child, and what would that teacher know, understand and be able to do. So trying to think about that. We had a kind of Arab Spring moment when we were learning about groups of teachers who meet and communicate and share ideas using social media, Twitter groups, and the whole idea of opening up. And maybe we need to think about that as well in terms of widening the debate, in terms of what kind of media do we use to share. And the other thing that we spent a little bit of time talking about was it's always important to connect teacher learning with outcomes. But if we think about learner outcomes, then that might lead us into a bit of a trap, because we might end up thinking about how do we demonstrate the impact of teacher learning on number of grades A to C and GCSE, and then it becomes quite tricky. But we thought, from picking up on Helen template and also picking up on the social work presentation, that in the presentation about social work, they talked about learning outcomes. So having demonstrable outcomes of teachers learning as a learning outcome, rather than a default position where you might say, well, what's happened to the learners? I mean, it's still talking about that, because you cannot ignore that. That's incredibly important. But we perhaps need to think about that in more sophisticated ways about how we make that argument. So in essence, it was, we already know quite a lot. It tends to be compartmentalised. How can we make connections between what we already know? And then how do we think about the audience that needs to be involved in the debate, so that we can widen the debate, rather than a rather depressing kind of teacher educators say one thing, policymakers here.
Thank you, Viv. Thank you very much. Well, that's, for me, been a very, very interesting and profitable morning. To be a bit mechanistic, please, for each table, make sure that Heather gets a set of notes so that we can draw it up. We're going to have lunch now. This afternoon we're going to try and move it on. We're going to ask Bob to update us a bit about that piece of work, the copy of which you've got in your pack. Also going to ask Brian, welcome Brian Hudson, the head of the School of Education and Social Work, who's going to talk about other initiatives to do with the College of Teachers. So, and then we're going to focus on taking it forward from here. Thank you very, very much. Can I also thank Cambridge University Press and encourage you to look at their stand. Thank you very much indeed.